So the mapping work stream has given us these areas of hectares in each land use that we have to report for. And the work that I cover is working out the tonnes of carbon per hectare for those areas that have been mapped as natural forest. And so that includes indigenous and also some exotic areas that are self-sown, so they haven't been planted for harvesting. And the 8K grid network that Steve talked about, so that gets placed over all the areas that are mapped as natural forests. We stick at every 8 kilometre point on that grid, we stick in a 20 by 20 metre plot. And if you're familiar with the Rob Allen and Houston Allen methodology of a standard vegetation 20 by 20 plot, that's the sort of thing we do. In addition, for carbon, we need to account for the deadwood pool, so we also do measure the deadwood on the plot. And as part of our all of government benefits, we also collect, we do a full species inventory on the non-vascular taxa on the plot. At least we're doing that in the 2009 to 14 period of measurement. So we have one full measurement that covers the country nationally that was done between 02 and 07. We have that data, and now we're in re-measurement phase, so we can that will give us the data that we can use to determine whether the forests are carbon neutral or a sink or a source of carbon nationally. So that we don't report that within the Kyoto commitment period, but it could influence negotiations for the period beyond 2012. So, as far as the biodiversity data goes, we have all the things that you might be familiar with, which are forest composition, species inventory, and forest structure. We collect information on browse, what fauna are seen, various physiological aspects of the plot, that sort of thing. And I guess the two key things that you may not do currently, or you may not be familiar with, are those measurements in the deadwood and also the non-vascular species. Sure, if there's anything else I can tell you.
How many plots are there nationally?
There's 1,256. There's 1,372 on the grid network, but 115 were abandoned for different reasons. Either access was denied, or they were on a scree slope that was too steep, or there was some issue with them.
So the bryophytes, I mean, is there a bryologist, or, I mean, they're all being identified as well?
Yeah.
In the markings?
Yeah, that's the contract requires the identification of all the non-vasculars apart from crustose lichens.
So you're just doing above ground carbon, below ground carbon, soil carbon. How does it all fit together?
We estimate below ground biomass as by multiplying the above ground biomass by 0.25. So it's assumed to be 20% of the total biomass. So that's based on a few studies, not a huge amount of data, and it is an area that could be possibly better researched.
And soil carbon?
In soil carbon, we use estimates that have that came from the historic soils data, which were in the National Soils Database. And in the first round of natural forest measurements, we collected additional information and additional samples in the natural forest to make sure that we had the right amount of carbon in those estimates.
Yeah.
So this
soils mapping is pretty limited for a lot of those natural forest areas there.
Yeah. So we just use one average for the country. And it's a assumed to be stable, and as long as the land use doesn't change. But with this land use change, we do get changes over a 28-year period.
Just in terms of the data, part of the topic was what local government could expect, what we would expect of local government. I mean, there's a real thrust within the ministry to align itself with the government, thinking that data collected by the government using government money is freely available, and we're going to follow that as much as possible. The data that Andrea is talking about is going to end up in NBS and accessible through that way. The mapping data, the raw satellite imagery was collected under a licence which was available to central, regional, local authorities, some Crown entities, on signature of a licence by the Chief Executive, and we sent out about 82 packs of the raw satellite imagery. They're probably worth about $700,000 each if you were to go and purchase them yourself, sort of circa 2008. And we're just about to release the product of the mapping, the Lucas mapping, which is the land use maps. You'll remember the ministry put LCDB 2 and LENS up on coordinates. We're going to follow that same model with our land use mapping, and that's sort of targeted before the end of this month. So they'll be freely available and downloadable. As far as possible, we're open about our data. We have some caveats that we have to honour, especially in the plantation forest and some of the plot network within the natural.
Yeah, of the 1,256 plots, 8 of them are have the data restricted by the landowner. And all that means is that if you wanted that data, you would have to ask permission of that landowner. It doesn't mean that you wouldn't get it necessarily. Anyway, if you consider that a third of the plots are actually on private land, it's not a bad. It's not a bad amount that are restricted.
How much does land use mapping differ from what you're considering?
The difference is around the number of categories that are mapped. We're mapping 16. There was a round of consultation done which sort of trimmed the LCDB categories down from something like in excess of 40 down to about an agreed 23, I think. So we're quite different, and we certainly haven't done any sort of sub-classification of the natural forest. No.
The woody vegetation is quite, you could compare quite well. I think it's in those areas that were always difficult under LCDB 2 as well, that we have to distinguish them.
They are comparable, the Lucas land maps and the LCDB 2.
For the woody vegetation, if you were comparing.
Yep.
Because the satellite does a good job with the woody.
So we really wanted comparable data because we have used the LCDB1 to capture some information, but after 5 years, LCDB2 is not comparable for LCDB1, so cost us money. So what we're really ideal is just Lucy's data should be comparable with at least LCDB3, so it's easy for go to the inventory, use your layers, but then contract, so otherwise it would be messy.
Understand.
But you have the same. Sorry, you would have the same issues possibly even